Imagine a picture-perfect slice of Middle America, where the biggest scandals are usually about who forgot to mow their lawn or whose pumpkin pie won the county fair. But in Eldridge, Nebraska, a town so small you could blink and miss it while driving down Interstate 80, something far darker was brewing behind the neatly painted fences and waving American flags. It started with whispers, subtle at first, like the rustle of cornfields in a summer breeze. But those whispers would soon erupt into a nightmare that shattered the illusion of safety in suburbia. What if the man next door, the one who always waved hello with a friendly grin, was hiding a secret so gruesome it would make your blood run cold? Hold on tight, because this tale of Harlan Thorpe isn't just another small-town story. It's a descent into the abyss of human depravity, where family bonds twist into something unrecognizable and deadly. Harlan Thorpe was the kind of guy who blended right into the fabric of Eldridge life. Born and raised in the heartland, he had that rugged, no-nonsense Midwestern charm that made folks trust him without a second thought. At 45 years old, with a salt and pepper beard trimmed just so and calloused hands from years of working as a mechanic at the local auto shop, Harlan seemed like the epitome of the American dream. He drove a beat-up Ford pickup truck, the kind with mud splatters from weekend fishing trips, and he was always the first to volunteer for the community barbecue or the church potluck. His wife, Eloan, was his high school sweetheart, a woman with a warm smile and a knack for baking apple pies that could win blue ribbons at the state fair. She worked part-time at the elementary school, helping out in the library, where she read stories to wide-eyed kids about adventures in far-off lands. Their two children, Briar and Lark, were the apples of everyone's eye. Briar, at 10, was a budding little league star with a gap-toothed grin and a love for collecting baseball cards. Lark, his 8-year-old sister, had curly hair that bounced when she skipped rope on the sidewalk, dreaming of becoming a veterinarian someday because she adored the neighbor's golden retriever. The Thorpe family home sat on Maple Street, a quiet cul-de-sac lined with ranch-style houses that all looked like they could have been plucked from a Norman Rockwell painting. White siding, red shutters, a manicured lawn with a swing set in the back where the kids played until dusk. On summer evenings, the air would fill with the sizzle of grills and the laughter of families gathering for block parties. Harlan was often at the center of it all, flipping burgers with a beer in hand, regaling neighbors with tales of his glory days playing football for the Eldridge Eagles. "Life's good here," he'd say, clapping a buddy on the back. "No drama, just good folks and hard work." But beneath that facade, cracks were forming, subtle fissures in the foundation of their seemingly perfect life that no one outside the family noticed at first. It all began innocently enough, or so it seemed. Harlan and Eloan had met back in 1998 at a county dance, where he swept her off her feet with his two-step and promises of a stable future. They married young, bought the house with a VA loan after Harlan's brief stint in the National Guard, and started building their family. Briar came along in 2015, followed by Lark 2 years later. To the outside world, they were the model of domestic bliss. Eloan volunteered for the PTA, organizing bake sales and field trips, while Harlan coached Briar's t-ball team on weekends. They'd attend Sunday services at the First Baptist Church, sitting in the same pew every week, with the kids fidgeting in their best clothes. Holidays were a big deal, Thanksgiving with turkey and all the fixings, Christmas with lights strung across the roof, and 4th of July fireworks watched from lawn chairs in the driveway. But as the years ticked by, the pressures of everyday life started to weigh on Harlan. The auto shop wasn't as busy as it used to be, what with folks buying electric cars and doing their own repairs from YouTube tutorials. Bills piled up, the mortgage, the kids' orthodontist visits, Eloan's desire for a minivan upgrade. Harlan began working overtime, coming home exhausted and irritable. Eloan noticed the change first. His once easy laughter turned sharp, his patience wore thin. Arguments flared over little things. Why the grocery budget was overrun, who forgot to pay the electric bill, or Harlan's growing habit of retreating to the basement workshop with a six-pack after dinner. "You're never here anymore," Eloan would say, her voice laced with frustration. "The kids miss their dad." Harlan would brush it off, muttering about providing for the family, but inside, resentment simmered like a pot left too long on the stove. Neighbors, like Silas Grant next door, caught glimpses of the tension. Silas, a retired farmer in his 70s with a weathered face from decades under the Nebraska sun, would see Harlan's truck pull in late at night, headlights cutting through the darkness. Once he overheard raised voices through an open window, something about money troubles and a Lowen's suggestion that Harlan see a therapist for his moods. But in Eldridge, people minded their own business. "Folks have rough patches," Silas would tell his wife over coffee. "They'll sort it out." Other neighbors, like the young couple across the street, the Millers, admired the Thorpes from afar. "They're so put together," Mrs. Miller would say while pushing her stroller. Little did anyone know that Harlan's rough patches were masking something far more sinister, a brewing storm of isolation, paranoia, and unchecked anger that would soon consume everything in its path. As summer turned to fall in 2025, the Thorpe family hosted what would be their last neighborhood barbecue. The air was crisp with the scent of burning leaves, and Harlan manned the grill like always, serving up hot dogs and hamburgers to a crowd of smiling faces. Elowen passed around her famous potato salad, while Briar and Lark ran around with water guns, soaking anyone who dared get too close. Laughter echoed through the backyard, punctuated by the crackle of the fire pit as the sun dipped low. "Best burgers yet, Harlan," someone shouted. He grinned, but his eyes held a distant glaze, as if he were already somewhere else. That night, after the guests left and the dishes were cleared, the house fell unusually silent. No more kids' giggles from upstairs, no murmured conversations between husband and wife. The next morning, the Thorpes' minivan stayed parked in the driveway, curtains drawn tight against the autumn light. Days stretched into weeks, and the odd silences began to nag at the edges of the community's awareness. Silas noticed the mail piling up in the box, uncollected. The kids' bikes, usually scattered on the lawn, remained neatly stored in the garage. When he waved at Harlan one afternoon, the man barely nodded, hurrying inside with grocery bags that seemed heavier than usual. Rumors started small. Maybe the family was on vacation, visiting Elowen's relatives in Iowa. Or perhaps there was illness. Flu season was ramping up. But as Halloween came and went without the Thorpe porch lit up with jack-o'-lanterns, and Thanksgiving approached with no sign of life from the house, the whispers grew louder. "Haven't seen Elowen at the school lately," one parent mentioned at pickup. "And the kids. They pulled them out for homeschooling or something." Harlan, when spotted, claimed everything was fine. "Just a little family time away," he'd say with a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Unbeknownst to anyone, that fateful barbecue had marked the beginning of the end. Harlan's mind, frayed by financial stress and unspoken demons from his past, perhaps echoes of a tough childhood with an absent father, had snapped under the weight. In the quiet hours after the party, as the embers died in the grill, he confronted Elowen in the kitchen over yet another bill that had arrived in the mail. Words escalated to shouts, and in a blur of rage, Harlan's hands found her throat. It was quick, silent, the kind of violence that happens in the blink of an eye but echoes forever. Panic set in as he stared at her lifeless form, the reality crashing down like a Nebraska thunderstorm. The children, hearing the commotion, came downstairs, their innocent faces twisted in confusion. "Mommy!" Lark whimpered. Harlan, in a daze, lured them to the basement with promises of a late-night snack, where the horror continued. He couldn't let them scream, couldn't let the world know. Suffocation came next, merciful in its quietness but monstrous in its intent. The following days blurred into a macabre routine. Harlan, driven by a delusional need to cover his tracks and perhaps a twisted survival instinct honed from hunting trips in the Platte River Valley, turned to the unthinkable. The garage became his workshop of horrors, tools meant for fixing cars repurposed for dismemberment. He ground parts into what he convinced himself was venison from a fictional deer hunt, marinating and freezing portions in labeled bags. The grill, still warm from the barbecue, became an instrument of disposal, smoke rising into the night sky as if nothing had changed. Neighbors smelled the faint char but thought nothing of it. Harlan was always tinkering with recipes. As winter's chill settled over Eldridge, Harlan maintained the charade. He answered work calls with excuses about family emergencies, forging notes for the school about extended leave. Social media updates ceased. The family's Facebook page, once filled with photos of picnics and school events, went dormant. Silas, ever the watchful eye, found a child's toy, a small stuffed bear, half buried in the snow near the fence line, as if tossed aside in haste. He knocked on the door once, but Harlan dismissed him with talk of a trip out of town. "Eloan's aunt is sick," he lied smoothly. But the lies were piling up like snowdrifts, and the scent of decay, faint but persistent, began to seep from the house on windy days. The town carried on, oblivious to the monster in their midst. Holiday lights twinkled on every street but Maple, where the Thorpe home stood dark and foreboding. Church services prayed for peace on earth, while Harlan sat alone in his living room, staring at family photos that now mocked him. His journal, hidden in the basement, filled with rambling entries about whispers from the meat and hallucinations of his family's voices guiding him through recipes. Paranoia gripped him. Every knock at the door, every passing car felt like accusation. He hosted a small potluck for a few co-workers, serving special stew that they praised for its richness, unaware of the source. Months dragged on, the calendar flipping to the new year without fanfare in the Thorpe household. Silas's suspicions mounted. He started noting Harlan's erratic behavior in a little notebook, late-night lights in the garage, the constant hum of the deep freezer. One evening, during a casual drop-by with a plate of cookies, Silas caught a whiff of something off from the kitchen, like spoiled game left too long. Harlan laughed it off as old hunting leftovers, but Silas's gut twisted. He confided in his wife, then a friend at the sheriff's office, planting the seed that would eventually bloom into investigation. Little did Eldridge know, the quiet suburb harbored a secret that would explode into national headlines, forcing everyone to question how well they truly knew their neighbors. The disappearances, the deceptions, the grisly transformation, all hidden behind closed doors in a town where trust was currency. But as the snow melted and spring whispered promises of renewal, the truth clawed its way to the surface, ready to devour the illusions of safety forever. What Harlan did next would seal his fate. But for now, in those early days of concealment, the horror festered like a wound untreated, waiting to infect the world around it. Deep within the recesses of Harlan Thorpe's mind, a storm had been brewing for years, one that no one in Eldridge could have predicted. It was not the kind of rage that exploded in public tantrums or bar fights at the local tavern. Instead, it simmered quietly, like coals banked low in a winter fire, waiting for the right gust of wind to ignite into an inferno. Harlan had always prided himself on being the steady one, the reliable husband and father who fixed leaky faucets and coached little league games without complaint. But beneath that calm exterior lay layers of frustration, resentment, and unspoken pain that had accumulated like dust in the corners of their modest home. Financial pressures were the spark that night, but the fuel had been gathering for a long time, fed by a childhood marked by abandonment and a marriage that had lost its spark amid the grind of daily life. The evening started like so many others in the Thorpe household. Rain lashed against the windows of their ranch-style house on Maple Street, turning the world outside into a blurry watercolor of grays and blacks. Harlan had come home late from the auto shop, his flannel shirt soaked through and his boots tracking mud across the linoleum kitchen floor. Eloan was at the stove, stirring a pot of chili that filled the air with the comforting aroma of tomatoes and spices, a recipe passed down from her grandmother in Iowa. The kids, Briar and Lark, were upstairs in their rooms, Briar practicing his swing with a foam bat against the wall, thump 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 echoing faintly, while Lark colored pictures of horses in her notebook, dreaming of the day she could ride one at the county fair. It was a typical Friday, or so it seemed, with the promise of a quiet weekend ahead, perhaps a trip to the hardware store or a movie night with popcorn. But as Harlan slung his tool belt onto the hook by the door, he spotted the stack of envelopes on the counter, their edges crisp and accusing under the fluorescent light. Bill's credit card statements, the mortgage notice, and a letter from the orthodontist reminding them of Briar's upcoming appointment for braces. Eloan had opened them earlier, her face paling as she calculated the totals in her head. She had been meaning to talk to him about it calmly, over dinner, but Harlan's mood was already foul from a day dealing with a difficult customer whose transmission repair had gone sideways. "What's all this?" he growled, snatching up the top envelope and scanning the red ink that screamed past due. Eloan turned from the stove, wiping her hands on her apron, her expression a mix of concern and weariness. "Honey, we need to figure this out. The shop's been slow, and my hours at the school got cut. Maybe we can dip into savings or—" Harlan cut her off, his voice rising like thunder. "Savings? What savings? You think I haven't been busting my ass every day to keep this roof over our heads?" The argument escalated quickly, words flying like arrows in the confined space of the kitchen. Eloan tried to reason, her voice steady at first, pointing out that they could cut back on extras like cable or eating out. But Harlan felt cornered, his pride wounded by the implication that he wasn't providing enough. Memories flooded back, unbidden, his father walking out when he was 10, leaving his mother to scrape by on waitress tips, the shame of free lunches at school. He had sworn he would never let his family suffer like that, yet here they were, drowning in debt. "You're always spending on the kids' crap," he shouted, gesturing wildly. "Dance lessons for Lark. New cleats for Briar. When does it end?" Eloan stepped back, her eyes widening, but she didn't back down. "It's for them, Harlan. For our family." We both agreed that was the breaking point. In a flash of blind fury, Harlan lunged forward, his hands clamping around her throat before he even realized what he was doing. The pot of chili bubbled forgotten on the stove as Eloan gasped, her fingers clawing at his wrists, her face turning red then purple. She kicked at him, knocking over a chair with a clatter, but the basement door was nearby, and Harlan dragged her down the stairs, away from the windows where neighbors might hear. The basement was his domain, cluttered with tools, old bikes, and boxes of holiday decorations, the concrete floor cold and unforgiving. Eloan's struggles weakened, her eyes pleading as the life faded from them. Harlan released her with a shudder, collapsing beside her body, his breath coming in ragged gasps. What had he done? Panic surged through him, mingling with the adrenaline, his mind racing for a way out. Upstairs, the thumping had stopped. Briar called out tentatively, "Mom? Dad? Everything okay?" Lark's voice joined in, high and curious. "I smell something burning." The chilly Harlan scrambled to his feet, wiping sweat from his brow, forcing his voice to sound normal. "It's fine, kids. Mom and I are just talking. Come down here, I've got a surprise ice cream sundaes in the freezer down here." It was a lie, but one that worked on children eager for treats. Their footsteps pattered down the stairs, Briar leading with his usual energy, Lark trailing behind clutching her stuffed bear. They froze at the sight of their mother slumped on the floor, confusion etching their young faces. "Mommy's sleeping?" Lark whispered, her lower lip trembling. Harlan's mind fractured further in that moment. He couldn't let them scream, couldn't let the world know. With tears streaming down his face, he grabbed Briar first, covering the boy's mouth and nose with a rag from the workbench, the one he used for oil changes, its chemical scent mixing with the boy's muffled cries. Briar fought, his small fists pounding against his father's chest, but Harlan was stronger, whispering apologies that sounded hollow even to him. "It's okay, buddy. Just go to sleep." Lark watched in horror, backing away, but Harlan scooped her up next, her tiny body wriggling like a caught fish. "Daddy, no!" she whimpered, but his hand clamped down, silencing her forever. The basement fell quiet, save for the drip of a leaky pipe and Harlan's sobs echoing off the walls. In the aftermath, as the storm outside raged on, Harlan sat among the bodies, his world shattered. The rage that had hidden for so long had erupted, leaving destruction in its wake. But survival instinct kicked and he had to hide this, make it disappear. The tools on the workbench gleamed under the bare bulb, offering a grim solution. He dragged the bodies to the corner, covering them with a tarp for now, and went upstairs to turn off the stove, the chili scorched black at the bottom. The house felt emptier already, the silence oppressive. Harlan poured himself a whiskey from the cabinet, downing it in one gulp, the burn steadying his nerves. He needed a plan, something to explain their absence. Relatives in Iowa, perhaps a sudden trip. Yes, that could work for a while. As the night wore on, Harlan's thoughts turned darker, influenced by half-remembered stories from true crime podcasts he listened to during long drives. Disposal: how to make sure no one found out. The garage attached to the house had a deep freezer, bought last year for bulk meat from hunting season. An idea formed, twisted and horrifying, born from desperation and delusion. If he could process them like game, grind and freeze, then no traces left. It was insane, but in his fractured state, it seemed logical, a way to keep providing even in death. He spent hours that night researching on his phone incognito mode, of course reading about butchers and preservation, his searches careful to avoid red flags. The hidden rage had not just killed his family, it had transformed Harlan into something unrecognizable. Over the next days, he would execute his plan with mechanical precision, but that first night was the crucible, forging his path into madness. Neighbors slept soundly as the rain tapered off, unaware that the man they trusted had crossed an irrevocable line. Silas Grant next door stirred once, thinking he heard a muffled cry, but dismissed it as the wind. Eldridge slumbered on, the quiet suburb hiding its first monster. But the rage wasn't done. It whispered to Harlan in the quiet hours, justifying his actions, urging him to cover every track. He cleaned the basement meticulously, using bleach from under the sink, scrubbing until his hands raw. The bodies he moved to the garage under cover of darkness, the rain masking any sounds. By dawn, exhaustion claimed him, but sleep brought nightmares of Alohan's eyes accusing him, the kids' laughter turning to screams. He woke determined, the hidden fury now his constant companion, driving him forward into the abyss. As weeks passed, Harlan's outward demeanor remained composed, but inside, the rage evolved into paranoia. Every glance from a coworker, every question about his family's whereabouts fueled it. He started avoiding social gatherings, claiming illness or work. The argument that night had been trivial, but its roots ran deep into Harlan's psyche, tangled with insecurities and unaddressed trauma. Therapy had been suggested once by Alohan, but he scoffed at it, calling it for weaklings. Now, in hindsight, he wondered if things could have been different, but the thought was fleeting, drowned by the need to survive. The kids' rooms upstairs remained untouched at first, their beds made, toys scattered as if they might return any moment. Harlan avoided going in there, the sight too painful, a reminder of what his rage had stolen. Briar's baseball glove on the dresser, Lark's drawings pinned to the wall, they mocked him. One night, in a fit, he boxed everything up, storing it in the attic, out of sight but not out of mind. The house echoed with emptiness, the rage filling the voids with hallucinations, faint whispers he swore were their voices, blaming him. Financially, things eased ironically without the family's expenses. Harlan found himself with extra cash, but it brought no joy, only guilt. He paid off some bills, forging Alohan's signature on checks, practicing in his journal until it looked right. The journal became his confessor, pages filled with rambling justifications. The economy was tough. She pushed him too far, the kids would have suffered anyway. Delusions crept in, the rage twisting reality until he believed he had done them a mercy, sparing them from a world of hardship. In Eldridge, life continued: the high school football games, the diner specials, the church bake sales. Harlan attended a few, forcing smiles, serving at potlucks with dishes that hid his secrets. The hidden rage had claimed its victims, but it hungered for normalcy, pushing him to maintain the facade. Yet cracks appeared: his weight loss, the dark circles under his eyes, the way he jumped at sudden noises. Silas noticed, commenting once, but Harlan brushed it off with a laugh that sounded forced. The storm that night had been literal and metaphorical, unleashing forces Harlan could not control. As months ticked by, the rage subsided into a dull ache, replaced by numbness, but the damage was done. Eldridge would soon learn the truth, but for now, the hidden rage lurked in the shadows of Maple Street, a warning of how fragile the veneer of civilization truly is. Harlan Thorpe, once a pillar of the community, now a shell haunted by his deeds, carried on, the weight of his secrets growing heavier each day. In the aftermath of the unspeakable acts in the basement, Harlan Thorpe found himself staring at the tarp-covered shapes in the corner, his mind a whirlwind of panic and detachment. The storm outside had subsided to a gentle drizzle, pattering against the garage door like hesitant fingers tapping for entry, but inside, a different kind of tempest raged. Harlan paced the concrete floor, his work boots echoing in the confined space cluttered with shelves of motor oil, rusty tools, and half-finished projects from better days. The deep freezer hummed in the far corner, a bulky white appliance purchased on sale at the local appliance store during last year's Black Friday rush, intended for storing venison from his annual hunting trips up near the Platte River. Now, it loomed as a silent accomplice in his burgeoning madness. He wiped his hands on his jeans, smearing faint traces he dared not acknowledge, and forced himself to think logically, or at least what passed for logic in his fractured state. Disposal was key. Evidence had to vanish, blended into the everyday until no one could tell the difference. A twisted notion took root, born from those hunting magazines he subscribed to, filled with articles on field dressing game and maximizing every part for self-sufficiency. Why waste, he rationalized, when the world was so unforgiving? It was a delusion that wrapped around his guilt like a bandage over a festering wound, convincing him this was survival, not sacrilege. Harlan flipped on the overhead fluorescent light, its harsh buzz filling the air as it flickered to life, casting long shadows across the workbench. He gathered his tools with mechanical precision, items that had once fixed carburetors and changed tires now repurposed for a far grimmer task. The electric grinder, a heavy-duty model he had bought for making sausage from deer hauls, sat dust-covered on a shelf. He plugged it in, testing the motor with a low whir that sent a shiver down his spine. Knives from his hunting kit, sharpened to razor edges for skinning, lay beside cleavers and a bone saw borrowed from the auto shop under the guise of a home project. Plastic sheets from the hardware store, originally for painting the living room, were spread out to contain the mess. He donned an old apron stained from oil changes, tying it with trembling fingers, and pulled on latex gloves from a box under the sink, the kind used for handling chemicals. The air grew thick with the scent of anticipation and dread, mingling with the faint metallic tang that already lingered. Starting with a low-one, Harlan approached the task methodically, his mind retreating into a numb haze where actions became steps in a recipe rather than desecration. He positioned her on the plastic, using the bone saw to section with careful cuts, the blade whining through resistance as he worked. Each piece was processed further, deboned where possible, the grinder churning with a rhythmic grind that drowned out his ragged breathing. He paused often, stepping back to splash water on his face from the utility sink, whispering justifications to the empty garage. "It's just like processing a buck," he muttered, recalling weekends in the woods with buddies, cooler packed with ice and harvest. But this was no hunt. It was horror veiled in familiarity. The patties formed under his hands, shaped with a burger press he had gotten as a Father's Day gift from the kids, ironic now in its utility. He mixed in spices from the kitchen pantry: garlic powder, onion flakes, a dash of smoked paprika to mask any off notes, marinating them in zip-top bags labeled with Sharpie as Venison Special Blend. The freezer filled gradually, shelves organized with military precision, each package dated as if from a recent trip. Turning to the children proved harder, his resolve cracking like thin ice underfoot. Briar's small frame elicited sobs that Harlan stifled with a rag, his vision blurring as he repeated the process. The grinder seemed louder now, accusatory in its efficiency, turning innocence into anonymity. Lark's curls caught in the machinery once, forcing him to stop and clean, a moment where reality pierced the delusion, and he nearly vomited into the sink. But he pressed on, driven by the fear of discovery, the patties smaller, almost delicate, as if that made a difference. He incorporated herbs from Eloan's garden, rosemary and thyme, wilted but still fragrant, convincing himself it honored her in some warped way. The marinade included Worcestershire sauce and a splash of beer from the fridge, recipes pulled from his phone's browser history, searched in the dead of night. By dawn's first light filtering through the garage window, the work was done, the plastic bundled and tied for later disposal in a distant dumpster behind the auto shop. Exhaustion clawed at him, but Harlan cleaned meticulously, hosing down the floor with a garden hose attached outside, bleach poured liberally to erase any trace. The tools were scrubbed, returned to their places, the grinder disassembled and soaked in soapy water. He showered upstairs, the hot water scalding his skin as if to purge the sin, dressing in fresh clothes before collapsing on the couch. Sleep came fitfully, dreams haunted by faces morphing into meals, whispers of recipes from spectral voices. Upon waking, the delusion solidified. He convinced himself this was a new beginning, a testament to resilience in hard times. The neighborhood cookout idea struck him over coffee, a way to normalize, to blend the unthinkable into the communal. He sent texts to neighbors Silas, included inviting them for an impromptu gathering that afternoon, citing a successful hunt and excess meat to share. "Come over around 4, bringing the special venison burgers," he typed, his thumb steady despite the inner turmoil. As the sun climbed higher, Harlan prepared the grill in the backyard, charcoal briquettes arranged in a pyramid, lighter fluid soaking them for a quick ignite. The patties thawed slightly on the counter, their appearance indistinguishable from store-bought ground beef, the marination working its magic. Neighbors arrived with side dishes: potato salad from Mrs. Miller, coleslaw from the couple down the street, beers chilling in a cooler. Laughter filled the air, kids from other families playing tag where Briar and Lark once did, their absence explained as visiting grandma in Iowa for a bit. Harlan manned the grill with a forced grin, spatula in hand, flipping the patties as they sizzled and popped. The aroma wafted rich and savory, drawing compliments. "Man, this venison is something else," Silas remarked, biting into one slathered with ketchup and mustard on a toasted bun. "What's your secret?" Harlan chuckled, a hollow sound. "Just a family recipe," he replied, the words tasting like ash. Others agreed, the meat tender with an unusual depth of flavor, attributed to wild game rather than suspicion. The cookout stretched into evening, fireflies emerging as stories were swapped around the fire pit. Harlan served seconds, watching as portions disappeared, a macabre satisfaction mingling with nausea. He had fed them unknowingly, binding the community in his secret, a delusion of control. Leftovers were packed for guests to take home, for sandwiches tomorrow, he insisted. As the last car pulled away, Harlan cleared the table, the grill cooling under the stars. The garage stood silent now, the freezer stocked for future meals, his journal entry that night detailing the success, the whispers praising his ingenuity. But cracks in the facade appeared even then. A neighbor's dog sniffed curiously at the fence line, drawn by lingering scents. Harlan shooed it away, paranoia flickering. The transformation was complete, bodies rendered into sustenance, but the horror lingered in his bones, a constant companion. Weeks blurred, Harlan hosting more events, potlucks at work, church suppers serving stews and chilies laced with his venison. Co-workers raved, asking for tips, unaware of the source. He experimented with recipes: slow cooker pulled pork, meatloaf baked in the oven, each success feeding the delusion while eroding his sanity. Financially, the absence eased burdens. No more school fees, grocery bills halved. Harlan paid debts, forging documents as needed, his forgery skills honed from signing report cards in Alohan's name. The house grew quieter, echoes amplifying his isolation. Hallucinations intensified visual flashes of family at the table, auditory murmurs of approval for his self-sufficiency. He researched online, delving into survivalist forums, justifying his actions as extreme homesteading. As winter approached, the freezer dwindled, prompting hunts that were excuses for solitude. Silas's suspicions simmered, noting Harlan's weight gain from sampling his own creations. The odd richness explained away. The grisly transformation had not just hidden the crime, it had woven it into the fabric of Eldridge life, a poison slow releasing. Harlan's mind fractured further, the delusion evolving into belief that this was destiny, a Midwestern pioneer spirit reborn in darkness. Yet deep down, guilt gnawed, a worm in the apple of his deception, waiting for the inevitable rot to surface. The cookouts continued, each one a step closer to unraveling, the community unwittingly complicit in the aftermath of his descent. As the crisp autumn leaves gave way to the first dustings of winter snow in Eldridge, Nebraska, a subtle unease began to weave its way through the tight-knit community, like a chill wind slipping under a door that everyone assumed was securely shut. It was not the kind of outright alarm that sends people locking their doors at night or whispering conspiracy theories over fences. Rather, it was a nagging doubt, the sort that starts with a misplaced glance or an unanswered question and slowly builds into something impossible to ignore. Harlan Thorpe continued to go about his days with an air of normalcy that fooled most folks at first glance. But for those who paid closer attention, like his elderly neighbor Silas Grant, the pieces of the puzzle were starting to shift in unsettling ways. Silas, with his decades of farming wisdom and a keen eye honed from watching crops for the slightest sign of blight, could not shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong next door, a suspicion that grew from small seeds into a thorny vine choking the tranquility of Maple Street. Weeks had slipped by since that last neighborhood barbecue, where Harlan's special venison had been the talk of the evening, praised for its rich flavor that lingered on the palate longer than expected. Harlan maintained his story with the steadfastness of a man reciting lines from a well-rehearsed script. His wife Alohan and the kids, Briar and Lark, were off visiting relatives in Iowa, helping out with an ailing aunt who needed extra hands around the farm. It sounded plausible enough in a place like Eldridge, where family obligations often pulled people away for extended stays, especially during the harvest season when kinfolk banded together to bring in the crops. Harlan would mention it casually at the auto shop, where he still clocked in most days, tinkering under hoods and swapping small talk with customers about the Cornhuskers' latest football game or the price of gasoline. "They'll be back before Christmas," he'd say with a shrug, his eyes darting away just a fraction too quickly, as if the words tasted bitter on his tongue. Co-workers nodded along, too busy with their own lives to probe deeper, but a few raised eyebrows when Harlan started showing up with homemade lunches that smelled suspiciously hearty, packed in Tupperware containers that he guarded like treasures. Silas Grant, however, was not one to let things slide so easily. At 72, with a face etched like weathered barn wood from years under the relentless Midwest sun, Silas had seen his share of life's twists and turns. He lived alone now, his wife having passed from cancer 5 years prior, and his days were filled with puttering in his garden, reading the local paper on his porch swing, and keeping an unofficial watch over the neighborhood. It started innocently for him, to a wave unanswered here, a light left on all night there. But then came the day he spotted something odd while raking leaves in his yard. A small child's toy, a brightly colored plastic truck that he recognized as Briar's, half buried in the soft soil near the shared fence line between their properties. It was not just tossed aside carelessly, it looked deliberately pushed into the dirt, as if hidden in haste. Silas picked it up, turning it over in his gnarled hands, the wheels still spinning freely despite the mud caked on them. "Strange," he muttered to himself, glancing over at the Thorpe house, where the curtains remained drawn even in the midday sun. He knocked on Harlan's door that afternoon, holding the toy out like an offering. "Found this in the yard, thought it might be your boy's," Silas said, his voice steady but his eyes searching Harlan's face for any flicker of explanation. Harlan opened the door just a crack at first, his frame filling the gap like a barrier, but he forced a smile when he saw Silas. "Oh, yeah, must have blown over in the wind. Thanks, neighbor." He snatched the toy quickly, his grip a bit too tight, and closed the door before Silas could say more. That interaction stuck with Silas like a burr on his sock. Harlan had not invited him in for coffee like he used to, nor asked about Silas's arthritis or the upcoming deer season. It was abrupt, almost rude, in a town where politeness was as ingrained as saying grace before meals. Silas filed it away in his mind, but the unease grew when, a few days later, he dropped by unannounced with a plate of his homemade oatmeal cookies, a gesture born from habit and concern. Harlan let him in reluctantly, leading him to the kitchen where the air hung heavy with the hum of the deep freezer in the adjacent garage. As they chatted about the dropping temperatures and the need for good snow tires, Silas caught a faint whiff of something off not quite rotten, but akin to game meat left too long in storage, a subtle decay that prickled the hairs on the back of his neck. "Smells like you've got some old venison in there," Silas commented lightly, nodding toward the garage door. Harlan laughed it off, a sound that rang false in the quiet house. "Yeah, from that hunt a while back. Need to clean it out one of these days." But his eyes shifted, and he steered the conversation away, offering Silas a cookie and ushering him out sooner than expected. From there, the suspicions mounted like snow piling on a roof, threatening to collapse under its own weight. Silas began keeping a small notebook in his shirt pocket, jotting down observations in his neat, blocky handwriting notes about Harlan's truck idling late at night, the garage light burning until dawn, or the way the mail accumulated in the Thorpe's box before being collected in bundles. He noticed the absence of the usual signs of family life. No kids' laughter echoing from the backyard, no Alohan's minivan shuttling to and from the school, no holiday decorations going up as Thanksgiving neared. The Thorpe home, once a hub of activity with bikes on the lawn and the scent of baking wafting out, now stood eerily still, like a photograph frozen in time. Silas confided in his old friend at the diner, a retired sheriff's deputy named Earl, over cups of black coffee. "Something ain't right over there," Silas said, his voice low amid the clatter of plates and the hum of conversation. "Family's been gone weeks, but Harlan acts like it's nothing. Found a toy buried, smelled something funky." Earl listened, stroking his mustache thoughtfully, but cautioned against jumping to conclusions. "People have their troubles, Silas. Maybe it's marital stuff. But keep an eye out." Meanwhile, other neighbors started picking up on the oddities, though their suspicions were slower to form. The Millers across the street, a young couple with a toddler, mentioned at a block meeting that they had not seen Alohan at the PTA gatherings lately. "She was always organizing those fundraisers," Mrs. Miller said, bouncing her child on her knee. "Hope everything's okay." Whispers spread at the grocery store, where the cashier noted Harlan buying bulk quantities of cleaning supplies and freezer bags, items that raised no alarms on their own but added to the growing mosaic of concern. At church, the pastor pulled Harlan aside after service, asking after his family with genuine warmth. Harlan repeated his Iowa story, but his attendance became sporadic, his seat in the pew often empty, fueling more quiet speculation among the congregation. "Pray for the Thorpes," the pastor intoned during announcements, a vague plea that hung in the air like incense. Silas's unease peaked one blustery afternoon when he ventured into his backyard to check on his compost pile and heard a peculiar noise from Harlan's side, a low, rhythmic thumping, like something being chopped or ground. Peering through a gap in the fence, he caught a glimpse of Harlan in the garage, hunched over the workbench, his back to the world, focused on some task with intense concentration. Silas did not linger, but the image haunted him that night as he sat in his recliner, the television droning unwatched. He replayed conversations in his head, piecing together timelines. The last barbecue, the sudden silence, Harlan's increasingly reclusive behavior. It was not just the toy or the smell. It was the cumulative weight of absences, the way Harlan's once friendly wave now seemed mechanical, his laughter forced. Silas decided then to act, dialing the non-emergency line for the local police department the next morning. "I'd like to report a concern about my neighbors," he said to the dispatcher, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "Family's been missing for weeks, and things don't add up." The call set wheels in motion, though slowly at first, as small-town law enforcement prioritized immediate threats over vague worries. An officer drove by the Thorpe house, noting nothing amiss from the street, but Silas's tip lingered in the report logs. As December approached, with its promise of holiday cheer, the suspicion spread further. A teacher at the elementary school flagged the kid's prolonged absence to the principal, who in turn notified child services. Homeschooling was mentioned, but no paperwork filed, the principal said in a meeting. Rumors reached the auto shop, where Harlan's boss commented on his distracted work, tools left scattered, mistakes in repairs that were unlike him. Harlan sensed the shifting tides, his paranoia amplifying every sidelong glance, every polite inquiry. He doubled down on isolation, curtains perpetually closed, driveway empty save for his truck. In the heart of Eldridge, where community bonds were forged over potlucks and parades, these mounting suspicions eroded the foundation of trust. Silas became the unofficial sentinel, his notebook filling with dates and details, his sleep interrupted by worries. He dreamed of the kids, their faces pale and questioning, and woke determined to uncover the truth. Little did he know how deep the darkness ran, how Harlan's secrets festered like an untreated infection, ready to burst forth and shock the town to its core. The quiet suburb, once a haven of predictability, now pulsed with unspoken tension, each day bringing the revelations closer, the facade cracking under the pressure of watchful eyes. 3 months had elapsed since the Thorpe family's eerie disappearance from the fabric of Eldridge life, a period marked by the slow creep of winter into spring, where snowdrifts melted into muddy puddles and the first green shoots pushed through the Nebraska soil like tentative promises of renewal. It was in this transitional season, with the air carrying the fresh scent of thawing earth and distant farm fields being plowed for planting, that the investigation finally ignited, sparked by the persistent concerns of Silas Grant and the accumulating whispers that had percolated through the community like coffee brewing in a diner pot. The local police department, housed in a modest brick building on Main Street that also served as the hub for the volunteer fire brigade and animal control, was not accustomed to high-profile cases. Their daily docket typically involved traffic stops on the highway, disputes over property lines between farmers, or the occasional bar scuffle at the Rusty Nail Tavern after a bad Cornhuskers game. But Silas's call to the non-emergency line, placed with the gravity of a man who had weathered dust bowls and economic downturns, set in motion a chain of events that would unravel the town's complacency and expose the rot hidden beneath its wholesome exterior. Officer Marlene Hayes, a 38-year-old veteran of the force with sharp eyes framed by wire-rimmed glasses and a no-nonsense ponytail, was the first to respond. She had grown up in Eldridge, attending the same high school as Harlan back in the day, though they ran in different circles, he on the football team, she buried in books and debate club. Assigned to follow up on welfare checks, Marlene drove her patrol cruiser down Maple Street one crisp morning, the sun glinting off the dew-covered lawns as neighbors peeked from behind curtains, curious about the official visit. She knocked on Harlan's door, her uniform crisp and her badge shining, notepad in hand. Harlan answered after a delay that felt deliberate, his face pale and drawn, shadows under his eyes speaking of sleepless nights. "Morning, officer," he said, his voice steady but his hands fidgeting at his sides. "What brings you by?" Marlene explained the concern from a neighbor about the family's prolonged absence, her tone professional yet probing. Harlan stuck to his script, claiming Aloan and the kids were still in Iowa, extending their stay due to the aunt's worsening health complications from diabetes, he added for color. I can give you her number if you want, he offered, but when Marlene pressed for details like the aunt's name and address, Harlan hesitated, mumbling about privacy before providing vague information that Marlene jotted down with a skeptical arch of her brow. Back at the station, Marlene ran preliminary checks, her fingers flying over the keyboard in the dimly lit bullpen where fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and the coffee machine gurgled eternally. She called the supposed aunt's number, only to find it disconnected, a red flag that waved brightly in her mind. Cross-referencing with missing persons databases turned up nothing at first, as no formal report had been filed, but a query to the elementary school confirmed Breyer and Lark's unexcused absences stretching back months, with no homeschooling paperwork on record. The principal, a kindly woman named Mrs. Abernathy who had taught Aloan in grade school, expressed worry over the phone, recalling Aloan's dedication to the library program and how her sudden departure felt out of character. Marlene then visited Silas, sitting with him on his porch swing that creaked rhythmically as they talked, a pitcher of iced tea sweating on the wicker table between them. Silas shared his notebook, pages filled with timestamps of odd noises, the buried toy, the peculiar smell during his cookie drop-off. He's changed, Silas said, his voice gravelly from years of pipe smoking. Like a man carrying a heavy load he can't set down. Marlene nodded, absorbing the details, her instincts honed from years on the beat telling her this was more than a family spat or extended vacation. As the day wore on, Marlene looped in her superior, Sergeant Tom Riley, a burly man in his 50s with a mustache that could hide secrets and a reputation for thoroughness earned from solving a string of cattle rustlings back in the 90s. They convened in the conference room, its walls plastered with faded posters on community safety and a whiteboard scrawled with shift schedules. Riley listened as Marlene laid out the timeline, the last sighting at the barbecue, Harlan's isolation, the inconsistent stories. Let's dig deeper, Riley decided, authorizing a background check on Harlan. What emerged was a mosaic of financial strain credit reports showing mounting debts, late payments on the mortgage, and a recent uptick in cash withdrawals that did not align with his mechanic's salary. A call to the auto shop revealed Harlan's erratic attendance, with excuses piling up like unpaid invoices. Riley suggested canvassing the neighborhood, and soon officers were knocking on doors along Maple Street, clipboards in hand, asking about the Thorpes with polite persistence. Responses varied. The Millers recalled Aloan's helpful nature at PTA meetings and noted the kids' bikes gathering dust in the garage visible from their window. An elderly couple down the block mentioned Harlan's potluck contributions, those rich stews that everyone raved about but now, in hindsight, left a queasy afterthought. One neighbor, a young mother named Clara, shared a chilling detail. Her dog had dug up a small bone fragment near the fence line weeks ago, which she dismissed as from a raccoon, but now wondered if it warranted a second look. Marlene collected it in an evidence bag, her gloved hands careful, sending it to the county lab for analysis. Meanwhile, a search of social media profiles showed the family's accounts dormant since the barbecue. No updates from Iowa or anywhere else, a digital silence that screamed louder than words. The investigation gained momentum when Child Services got involved. Their caseworker, a compassionate soul named Lydia, visiting Harlan unannounced. She found him in the living room, surrounded by family photos that seemed mocking in their cheerfulness, dust motes dancing in the slanted afternoon light. Harlan repeated his tale, but Lydia pressed for proof plane tickets, emails, anything. His evasion raised alarms, and she filed a report recommending immediate action. By week's end, Riley had enough for a search warrant, presented to the local judge over a hurried lunch at the courthouse cafe, where pie slices were as legendary as the justice served. The judge, an old-timer with a penchant for fairness, signed off after reviewing the affidavits, citing probable cause based on the welfare concerns and inconsistencies. The search unfolded at dawn the following day, a team of officers converging on the Thorpe home like a coordinated harvest crew. Harlan was roused from sleep, bleary-eyed in his robe, as Marlene read him his rights and explained the warrant. He protested mildly, but his pallor betrayed deeper fear. The house was methodically combed. Upstairs, the kids' rooms untouched, beds made as if waiting for occupants, closets full of clothes that smelled faintly of laundry detergent. In the basement, faint bleach residue on the floor caught an officer's eye, swabbed for testing. But the garage yielded the jackpot: the deep freezer, its contents labeled meticulously as game meat in Harlan's handwriting. Officers donned masks as they unpacked bags of frozen patties and cuts, the shapes too uniform, the color off in ways that twisted guts. Samples were rushed to the lab, where initial tests hinted at human tissue, confirmed later by DNA matching to missing persons reports now formally filed for Eloan, Breyer, and Lark. As forensics teams swarmed, Harlan was taken to the station for questioning. His hands cuffed in the back of the cruiser, the ride silent save for the crackle of the radio. In the interrogation room, a stark space with a one-way mirror and a table bolted to the floor, Riley and Marlene tag-teamed the interview. Harlan held out at first, sticking to his Iowa fabrication, but cracks appeared under pressure. Photos of the freezer contents laid out like accusatory cards. Preliminary lab results dangled as bait. Sweat beaded on his forehead as they revealed the bone fragments matched to human remains, likely juvenile. Finally, the dam broke. Harlan slumped, confessing in halting words the argument, the rage, the suffocations. But the full horror emerged when they seized his journal from a hidden drawer in the basement, pages scrawled with delusions of whispers from the dead, recipes intertwined with remorse, hallucinations of family voices guiding his grisly work. The town reeled as news leaked, first in hushed tones at the diner, then blasting across local news channels, helicopters hovering overhead like vultures. Eldridge, once defined by its annual corn festival and Friday night lights, now synonymous with nightmare. Neighbors gathered in clusters, sharing stunned disbelief, some vomiting upon hearing rumors of the potlucks. Silas watched from his porch, vindicated yet heartbroken, his tip the catalyst that brought light to the darkness. The investigation expanded, subpoenas for financial records revealing forged signatures, searches of dumpsters yielding bloody plastic traces. Autopsies loomed, promising more revelations, as Harlan sat in a holding cell, the weight of his actions crashing down like a prairie storm. Yet the probe was far from over. Federal agents arrived, drawn by the cannibalistic elements, coordinating with state police for a deeper dive. Interviews with co-workers uncovered praises for Harlan's venison dishes shared at breaks, leading to voluntary DNA tests for unwitting participants. The community grappled with collective guilt. How had they missed the signs? Church services swelled with prayers for healing, vigils held on the town square with candles flickering against the night. Marlene, haunted by memories of a simpler Eldridge, vowed to see justice through, her determination a beacon amid the chaos. As spring fully bloomed, the investigation blossomed into a full-blown case, roots digging deep into the soil of secrets, unearthing truths that would forever alter the town's soul. With the click of handcuffs echoing in the quiet interrogation room of the Eldridge police station, Harlan Thorpe's world collapsed inward like a house of cards caught in a sudden gust, revealing layers of deception and depravity that no one in the tight-knit community could have fathomed. As the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the scuffed linoleum floor, Harlan sat slumped in a metal chair, his once steady mechanic's hands now trembling as detectives laid out the evidence piece by damning piece. The confession spilled from him in fits and starts, a torrent of words that started as denial but twisted into admission under the weight of irrefutable proof: the frozen remains in his garage, the DNA matches confirming the unthinkable fate of Eloan, Breyer, and Lark. But what followed was not just a recounting of the murders. It was a plunge into an abyss of additional horrors that shocked even the seasoned officers, unveiling a man whose mind had warped into something monstrous, driven by delusions that blurred the line between survival and savagery. Whispers of fed portions to friends, hidden sedatives, and a secret pregnancy destroyed in flames. These revelations would haunt Eldridge for generations, forcing the town to confront how evil could hide in plain sight, masquerading as the guy next door who shared recipes at church suppers. Harlan's arrest came swiftly after the search warrant raid, his protests fading as officers escorted him from his home on Maple Street, neighbors gathering in clusters on their lawns, wrapped in coats against the early spring chill, their faces pale with disbelief. Word spread like wildfire through the small town, from the diner where waitresses paused mid-pour to exchange wide-eyed glances, to the auto shop where his co-workers stared at his empty workbench, tools still scattered from his last shift. The media descended soon after, vans with satellite dishes parking along the curb, reporters thrusting microphones at anyone who would talk, turning Eldridge into a reluctant spotlight of national intrigue. Headlines screamed from television screens and newspaper stands. Nebraska mechanic accused of gruesome family slayings, but the full extent of the shocking revelations emerged only in the hours and days following, as interrogations peeled back the layers of Harlan's fractured psyche. In the stark confines of the interrogation room, with its one-way mirror reflecting his haggard face and a tape recorder whirring softly on the table, Harlan began to unravel. Detective Marlene Hayes and Sergeant Tom Riley took turns, their voices calm but insistent, presenting photos of the labeled freezer bags, lab reports highlighting human tissue markers, and the journal entries scrawled in Harlan's own hand, detailing hallucinations of his family's voices whispering instructions for marinades and grilling techniques. At first, Harlan clung to fragments of his fabricated story, mumbling about Iowa relatives and a sudden trip, but as the evidence mounted, his defenses crumbled. "It was an accident at first," he whispered, his eyes darting to the corners of the room as if expecting spectral visitors. "The argument got out of hand, and then I couldn't stop." He described the stormy night in vivid detail, the financial pressures boiling over into violence, his hands around Alohan's throat in the kitchen before dragging her to the basement. The children, lured downstairs with promises of treats, met the same fate, their small bodies no match for his desperation-fueled strength. But the confession veered into territories that left the detectives exchanging stunned glances. Harlan admitted to the dismemberment and processing in the garage, the grinder churning through the night as he convinced himself it was no different from dressing a deer after a hunt. "I had to make use of everything," he said, his voice taking on a detached, almost proud tone, as if recounting a clever DIY project. "Waste not, want not, that's what my old man taught me before he left." The delusions poured out, how he heard Alohan's voice suggesting spices, Breyer's laughter echoing as he shaped patties, Lark's whimpers turning into recipes in his mind. He revealed hosting the neighborhood cookout the very next day, serving those special venison burgers to unsuspecting friends and families, watching them eat with a mix of horror and twisted satisfaction. "They said it was the best they'd had," Harlan recounted, a faint smile flickering before dissolving into sobs. Silas Grant, the vigilant neighbor whose tip had sparked the investigation, was among those who had partaken, the memory now a nightmare that would require therapy for years. As the interrogation stretched into the evening, with coffee cups accumulating on the table and the outside world darkening, more shocking details emerged from Harlan's lips. He confessed to extending the horror beyond that initial barbecue, incorporating portions into dishes for potlucks at work and church events. "Stews, chilies, even a meatloaf for the office Christmas party," he listed, his eyes glazing over as he recalled the compliments. Co-workers had raved about the richness, attributing it to some secret family blend, never suspecting the source. Harlan estimated he had fed remnants to at least 24 people unknowingly, binding the community in a macabre communion that sent ripples of revulsion through Eldridge when leaked. Health officials were notified, voluntary tests offered to those who attended the gatherings, though no physical harm came from it beyond the psychological trauma. "It was like they were still with me, providing," Harlan justified, his delusion laid bare, a psychiatrist later diagnosing it as a severe dissociative episode triggered by guilt and untreated mental health issues stemming from his abandoned childhood. The autopsy reports, rushed through the county morgue with federal oversight due to the case's notoriety, unveiled even more gut-wrenching revelations. Pathologists, working under bright lights in a sterile lab smelling of formaldehyde and antiseptic, examined the thawed remains with meticulous care. They confirmed the causes of death: strangulation for Alowan, suffocation for the children, but toxicology screens revealed sedatives in Briar and Lark systems, traces of benzodiazepines that Harlan admitted slipping into their bedtime milk that fateful night. From a secret stash he kept in the basement workshop. "To make it easier," he murmured, head bowed. "So they wouldn't fight as much." The pills, prescribed years ago for his own anxiety but hoarded and used, had been crushed and mixed in, ensuring a quieter end. This detail painted Harlan not just as impulsive but premeditated in his cover-up, elevating the charges from manslaughter to first-degree murder. Worst of all, buried in the autopsy findings like a final cruel twist, was the discovery that Alowan had been pregnant approximately 8 weeks along, a fact Harlan claimed ignorance of until that moment. The unborn child, a tiny life extinguished before it began, had been consumed in the grill's flames along with the rest, evidence destroyed in the most irrevocable way. "She never told me," Harlan choked out, though detectives suspected he might have known, the pregnancy perhaps the spark for the financial argument that escalated fatally. Alowan's friends later shared whispers of her excitement, planning to surprise Harlan on their anniversary, a detail that humanized her further and deepened the tragedy. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community, vigils swelling with candles and tears, mothers clutching their children tighter as news anchors reported with somber tones. Harlan's journal, seized as key evidence, provided a window into his descending madness, pages filled with rambling entries that chronicled his hallucinations and justifications. "They speak to me from the freezer," one entry read, dated weeks after the killings. "Alowan says add more garlic next time. The kids laugh when it's done right." Psychologists pored over it, diagnosing paranoid schizophrenia exacerbated by stress, though Harlan had shown no prior signs, his facade of normalcy cracking only in solitude. The document became central to the prosecution's case, illustrating premeditation and lack of remorse, while the defense argued diminished capacity, setting the stage for a trial that would captivate the nation. As charges were filed, multiple counts of murder, tampering with evidence, and desecration of corpses, Harlan was remanded to the county jail, a gray facility on the outskirts of town where he paced his cell, haunted by the very whispers he once embraced. Eldridge struggled to heal, support groups forming at the community center, therapists brought in for those affected. Silas Grant, hailed as a hero in local papers, received thank-you cards and baked goods, though he waved off the praise, saying he only did what any neighbor should. The Millers and others relocated, unable to bear the proximity to the house now taped off as a crime scene, its once cheerful facade a grim reminder. The shocking revelations did not end with a confession. Investigations expanded, uncovering Harlan's online searches for disposal methods, his forged documents to collect Alowan's life insurance, and even a half-baked plan to flee to Montana under a new name. Friends and family from his past were interviewed, painting a picture of a man always on the edge, his charm masking deep insecurities. Alowan's relatives in Iowa, real ones this time, flew in for memorials, their grief raw as they learned the full extent. The unborn child's existence prompted debates on fetal rights in the charges, adding legal complexity. Months later, as the trial loomed, Eldridge began to reclaim its identity, the Corn Festival proceeding with subdued festivities, a memorial plaque planned for the town park in honor of the victims. Harlan, facing life without parole or worse, sat in court with a vacant stare, the revelations having stripped him bare. The case became a cautionary tale, taught in criminology classes, a reminder that behind closed doors, even in the heartland, darkness can fester unchecked. Yet amid the horror, stories of community resilience emerged, neighbors checking on each other more, mental health resources expanded, a silver lining in the storm. In the end, the shocking revelations forced Eldridge to confront its own vulnerabilities, binding the town in shared sorrow and strength. Harlan's deeds, once hidden, now exposed, served as a stark warning. Evil wears familiar faces, and vigilance is the price of peace. As the gavel fell in future proceedings, closure came slowly, but the memory of Alohan, Briar, Lark, and the unborn lingered, a poignant echo in the quiet suburbs.